The experiment in the heart of the war-ravaged 1940s. Amid the chaos of the Third Reich's secretive research, a hidden facility was built deep within the forests of eastern Germany. The facility was known only by a number, Lager 33, and to the outside world, it didn't exist at all. Located miles from any civilian settlements, it was the site of some of the most gruesome experiments ever conducted during World War II. Dr. Klaus Richter, a high-ranking scientist under the SS, was known for his extreme obsession with unlocking the mysteries of human biology. His official title was lead researcher in human enhancement, but in reality, he was little more than a monster with a doctorate. He had long abandoned any pretense of ethics, his mind consumed by a single, horrific vision: to create the perfect soldier, one that would never die, never feel pain, and never surrender. Among his twisted experiments was a project he called Project Unsterblich, immortal. The experiment was simple in its design: take a human being, break them down to their core, and rebuild them. The goal was to make a soldier that could withstand any injury, any bullet, and any torture. The first test subjects were prisoners of war, criminals, and anyone unlucky enough to fall into Dr. Richter's hands. One such test subject was a man named Lukas Weber. He had been a farmer in Poland before the Nazis invaded. His village was razed, his family slaughtered, and he was captured during a raid. He was barely alive when they brought him into Lager 33, a broken man, but still breathing. He had no idea what awaited him in that dark, isolated place. The steel door to his cell opened, and two soldiers dragged Lukas inside the sterile, cold room. They strapped him to a metal table, his wrists and ankles bound so tightly that he could barely feel his limbs. The walls around him were lined with strange, ominous machines, each one flickering with eerie lights. He could hear the faint hum of electricity, the sound of liquid moving through tubes, and the low buzz of machinery that made his skin crawl. Dr. Richter entered the room, his cold eyes scanning Lukas's trembling form. He smiled, a twisted grin of anticipation. "You have been chosen," Richter said, his voice as flat as a dead man's. "You are going to make history, Weber. You will be the first." Lukas wanted to scream, but fear had already stripped him of his voice. What did they want from him? What kind of horrors would they inflict? Richter motioned to his assistants, and they began their work. The first phase was chemical. They injected Lukas with a cocktail of experimental drugs designed to override his pain receptors and increase his strength. But they didn't stop there. They implanted sensors directly into his nervous system, wiring him to machines that could control his body's responses. His heartbeat, his muscle contractions, his nervous system, all of it was monitored and manipulated by a computer. But the drugs weren't enough. Richter had other plans. In the second phase, Lukas was injected with a mixture of substances that were nothing short of monstrous. Human cells, animal DNA, and synthetic compounds were combined, altering the very structure of his cells. His body twisted and spasmed as the chemicals coursed through his veins, making him feel as if he were on fire from the inside. His flesh stretched, his muscles bulged unnaturally, and his heart raced as it tried to keep up with the changes. It was a pain beyond anything he had ever experienced, so intense that it felt like his skin was being ripped apart from the inside. And then, something went wrong. The pain didn't stop. It intensified. Lukas's body contorted, and he could feel his bones snapping and resetting, his organs shifting and mutating. His vision blurred, but he could still hear Richter's voice. The doctor was speaking to him, but his words sounded distant, muffled. "Just a little longer, Weber," Richter murmured, his voice tinged with excitement. "You're almost there. We're so close to perfection." But Lukas was beyond listening. His mind was unraveling, his senses overwhelmed by the chaos inside him. His body was betraying him, every cell waging a war against his consciousness. The pain was unbearable, and yet, the worst part was that he couldn't die. The drugs and procedures had made sure of that. There was no escape from the agony. The experiment wasn't just turning Lukas into a super soldier. It was making him into something else, something unrecognizable. Hours passed, maybe days. Lukas lost track of time. He was no longer aware of where he ended and the machines began. He had become a part of the experiment, a mere puppet in Dr. Richter's hands. His mind was fraying at the edges, and he could feel himself slipping away. But then, just as suddenly as the pain began, it stopped. Lukas opened his eyes. The world around him had changed. The dim lights of the laboratory now appeared brighter, almost painfully so. His body felt different. He could feel every inch of his skin, every beat of his heart, as if it were magnified. His senses were heightened, sharper. He could hear the slightest movement in the room, the faintest shift of air. His muscles were stronger than ever, his reflexes quicker. He had become a weapon, exactly what Richter wanted, but Lucas didn't feel like a soldier. He felt like a monster. Good, Dr. Richter said, watching Lucas with a satisfied grin. You've passed phase 1. Now, we'll see how you handle combat. Lucas didn't know how to respond. The experiment had worked, but it had taken something from him. His humanity was gone, buried under layers of artificial enhancements and twisted science. He was no longer a man. He was something else. Something that couldn't die. Something that couldn't feel. But in the deep recesses of his altered mind, a single thought persisted. A thought that had survived the experiment, escape. The next few days blurred into a haze of violence and obedience. Lucas was put through tests, physical, mental, psychological, his responses recorded, analyzed, and perfected. They tested his strength, his agility, his endurance. But as the tests continued, the whispers in Lucas's mind grew louder. The experiment had failed in one crucial way. It had given him power. But it had also given him the one thing that Richter had feared most, free will. One night, as Richter and his assistants gathered around the monitors, Lucas broke free. He tore through the laboratory like a beast, his body faster and stronger than any human should be. The soldiers in the facility were no match for him. He didn't hesitate. He didn't care about their orders. All he could think of was one thing. Escape. As he made his way toward the exit, the hallways filled with the sounds of alarms and shouting. But Lucas was unstoppable. His body had become a living weapon, his mind consumed with a single goal, to destroy everything that had made him this way. But when he finally emerged from the facility into the forest, he didn't stop. He ran, and he ran, until his legs gave out beneath him. By then, it was too late. The damage had been done. Lucas had escaped, but the horrors of Dr. Richter's experiment would never leave him. They had created something more than a soldier. They had created a creature that could never die, never feel, and never be free. And in the silence of the night, deep in the forest, Lucas heard a voice, Richter's voice, echoing in his head. You'll never escape, Weber. You're mine now. Forever. The forest was quiet, but Lucas could feel the presence of the doctor in his mind. Always watching, always waiting. The experiment wasn't over. It had only just begun.